I'm just going to go ahead and hold this microphone. Welcome to session number 2 about what it takes to heal a marriage. Up here at the table, we have Stephen and Rhyll Croshaw and Dan Gray that will be our presenters today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dan, and then Dan will go ahead and introduce the Croshaws. My name is Janelyn Holt, and I welcome you. I am a member of the UCAP board, and we are pleased to have you all here. Just quickly, the information for all 3 of our panelists is in your brochure, and so just for sake of time, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things about Dan. But just know he is extremely qualified to be here and to address us. Dan is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in addictions counseling. He has a master's degree in social work and is a certified sexual addiction therapist. He is also certified as an addictions counselor with the National Association of Forensics Counselors. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Dan and to the Croshaws. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelyn. Can everybody hear okay? Y'all good back there? Okay. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for your attendance. As I mentioned in the last session that I presented at, it's a real honor to be with a group of people that are engaged in this battle and to be my fellow warriors in battling for our own hearts, for the hearts of the family members and people that we love. And so to be here as a part of this together is a real honor, and I thank the UCAP board for the invitation to do this. I am going to let Rhyll and Steve introduce themselves a bit more in depth when we turn the time over to them, which will be in just a couple of moments. I wanted to do just a kind of a preliminary give you a perspective in regards to where we're going with this today. We are wanting to look at the key components in learning how to reestablish a sense of well-being and trust and safety in a relationship that has been damaged by pornography and sexual addiction. In the last session, we talked a lot about the relational trauma that a person experiences when someone that they love betrays their trust, the emotional impact that has, the damage that it does to one's heart, to one's perspective of life, the feelings of loss that is very prominent when we go through those experiences. We also talk a bit about the feelings of loss that the person that is struggling with the addiction has as well. Because when the truth comes out, when a person is exposed, because of the hurt and pain that is created in the life of a spouse, there is also a feeling of loss of the relationship with the person who is actually the addict or the person struggling with the compulsive behaviors. A sense that if I really share, and maybe that's why there hasn't been sharing for a long time, if I share this with her, she's going to leave me. So that fear of abandonment is so very real. And then when the information is shared, there's usually expression of hurt, anger, sometimes threats of divorce, sometimes divorce does occur. But as a couple looks at bringing their life together and going through the healing process, what are the key components that a couple needs to look at in making that happen? What are the strategies that need to be used? How do we deal with then the feelings of abandonment? Because when there is this type of addiction, there is always a sense of abandonment. Abandonment of the relation that one had, a feeling of loss. The loss process is very real. I had a dream. I don't know if I even know this person now. Do we really have a future? Are we going to be in this home together, or am I going to have to raise these children by myself? The sense of security is taken out. So now who do I rely on? I thought I could rely on him or her all these years, and now I don't know this person, so how can I rely on them? How am I ever going to be able to redevelop trust and a sense of security and safety with this person? Should I even stay in the relationship? I'm getting all kinds of counsel and guidance from other people telling me that I should leave, that I should stay. I'm feeling even abandoned by God. I thought I was kind of told to marry this person, and then this happened. Does God have a bad sense of humor here? What did he have in store for me? Why did this happen? And so there is a place where usually the spouse goes that is very dark and alone. So how is that ever then reestablished in terms of that sense of feeling of safety and trust? What do you need to do, both of you, in order to have that happen? That's a part of what the recovery work is about. Sobriety and abstinence, very important parts of recovery. That needs to be there to help to establish a sense of safety. That's just kind of the beginning part of it. How do you then treat your spouse? How do you share your life with your spouse that maybe you've held so many things from her? For many, you've withheld those things for so many years. Does she really know my struggles, my emotional feelings about things? Does she know my heart? How do I now start to do that and share that with her when I haven't shared it with her before? And for the spouse, again, how do I open myself up and be vulnerable again? If I start to get close, I start to become vulnerable, am I just going to be squashed again? All of those questions are things that most couples have to go through and experience and work through in their healing process. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Rhyll and Steve. This is a great couple. Two people that I've grown to love, to respect deeply. They have been through their own healing process. They are still healing, right? We all are. They also have taken it on to become real warriors in the fight against pornography and sex addiction. And I'll let them share some of that with you. They are the co-founders of SA Lifeline, which has a booth out here. They've produced materials. They speak in these kinds of settings, in church settings, and many others. They are a true voice in the wilderness, calling people to a sense of awareness of how to heal and how to bring that sense of well-being and safety back into their lives. So with that, I'd like to just turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
We're going to stand up, at least I am, because I couldn't use my hands so much.
Sitting down.
Thank you, Dan. Dan's a good friend. And when we found LifeStars, actually Stephen found it because I'd given up. It's like, whatever, I guess we're going to get divorced. Can you hear me?
On the control thing that you have in there.
Maybe I should use my one hand.
Oh,
Oh,
there.
in
Oh,
here?
there. Okay.
Okay, I don't know whether that's going to be any better. Just bring it up. Use my other hand. Okay.
Now you can only use one hand, Rhyll.
Okay. We have been married for 40 years. We have 7 children and expecting our 16th grandchild. For us, we are religious people, and on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, we sat in the Logan Temple with every one of our children and their spouses, all 16 of us. That, for us, is a miracle, starting with the fact that their father and their mother could sit together in that place. And we don't take that for granted. A couple of years ago, I remember exactly where I was standing in my bathroom when my cell phone rang. Sarah Jane Weaver of the Deseret News was calling. I don't know, Sarah, didn't know. She said, we are doing a project through Deseret Media called Out in the Light. We understand that you have a foundation called SA Lifeline Foundation. It was really new, a couple of years old. I said, yes, that's true. And she said, we would like to have some information, some help on this project, the Out in the Light project. It's about women and how they are affected by their spouses, boyfriends, relationships with a sex addict, with a porn addict. When we say that, it goes, we think of it in the same way. So she talked to me for a few minutes, and then when she said, why did you start your foundation? I think she already knew. But she wanted me to say, and I had never said this in a public way. A few people knew. And I said, because I am one of those women. And my husband is working recovery. And she said, are you willing to come out in the light? No shadows on your face, no changed names. With a name like Rhyll, what could I do, right? Thanks, Mom and Dad. I am not anonymous. But I remember the feeling of her asking me that. Are you willing to come out? And what Dan said in the last, if you were in his last presentation, the first big lie was hide with Adam and Eve. In this particular issue, compulsive behavior, addiction, betrayal from a spouse, being affected, it is our tendency to hide, to isolate and say, I can't tell anybody, therefore I cannot find any support. So we don't believe or even say to people, you must do it the way we do it. But one thing I know, that every man and every woman who has found recovery in this particular situation, with addiction, with this particular addiction, this is not the same in my mind as a drug addiction. This is very personal. This is about me. I am a sexual being. And my husband didn't like that? No. That's not it. I have discovered it wasn't about me. It started way before I even knew him. It doesn't have anything to do about me as a woman or a person. It's his addiction. Has it affected me? In a huge way. So one of the things I have found, going back to this, coming out in the light, is that a person who is truly in recovery, Stephen, I've heard him say, how do you know a person's in recovery? Or how do you know that they're not? They never speak it. They never say a word to anybody. Of course not to the public, no. But how do you know that they're in recovery? You can't shut them up. Because they have found truth. They have found hope. They have found light. Their life has changed. They have found healthy living. We don't call it confession anymore. Early on, there was confession. It needed to be total confession. It's now recovery sharing. Recovery sharing is a great gift for us and for other people, because there has been a major change in our life. So that's what we are here to talk about. I'm going to turn it over to Stephen first. Well, I got first, but anyway. Next.
Thank you. We'll stand together as we talk about our experiences, and we're here really to talk about healing a relationship that's damaged by pornography and sexual addiction. And our experiences relate to the subject directly. The only way that we can really help you understand where we're coming from is to tell you a bit about our story. And it is available in more detail than we'll tell it today in a book that Rhyll has written and also in some videos. But the main points we would like to touch here so that you can get a feel for where we're coming from. I would add to what Rhyll has said, when a person finds recovery, they're more willing to share their story because they feel less shame associated with the behavior. However, we don't necessarily recommend that everyone run out and look for an opportunity to show up on TV and tell their story. That's not our point at all.
It wasn't really fun.
But it is our point that, as Step 12 talks about, those who are familiar with Step 12, there comes a time in our recovery when we want to share our experiences and help others. And that comes from as part of recovery and working recovery. But that's has to be done with caution. So we're not suggesting that necessarily all of us need to run out of here and tell our own story if we have one that's similar. But very briefly, and I will do this very briefly, share my experiences with addiction behaviors, specifically sexual addiction behaviors. My first exposure to pornography was age 6. I found a magazine as a little boy. I had no clue. I found the magazine actually in my home, in my brother's stuff, who was 9 years older than me. And that was a long time ago. That was in the 50s. My hair isn't gray because I'm 21. And the pornography of that day was very different, but I looked at the entire magazine. I remember the experience, and then I gave the magazine to my mother. I don't recall that she said anything to me, but that was my first exposure to pornography. I was drawn to it, and I went back to it after that. Never did I again give the magazine that I was looking at to my mother. I don't think she shamed me, but I don't think she knew how to help me understand what I was now experiencing. Fast forward in my life, I sought pornography. I've discovered other behaviors associated with sexual addiction, including masturbation, which is very common for young men. And then when I was in high school, inappropriate relationships. I wanted to be a good boy. And I, frankly, on the outside and by all appearances, was one of those good boys. And was popular with my peers, active in school, active in church, and life seemed to be good on the outside perspective. From the inside, I felt like I was less than worthy for all that I was. When I met the girl that I fell in love with, she's standing to my left, I had these experiences in my past. What was I going to do with them? I had actually talked about them before to leaders in my church and had expressed concerns, had even tried to stop, and felt like in many ways I had. After we met, I thought, you know what? I've talked about this, and I think I've got this underhand and behind me. I still felt guilty about it, and just before we were married, I chose to again approach another leader, go through a bit about the circumstances, and that situation I didn't want to disclose, and I made sure as I was disclosed to Rhyll, as I was talking this through as a leader, that I was leaning that direction for various reasons, and then I basically got some satisfaction that I wasn't going to tell her. She came into the relationship without an experience of understanding my past behaviors. I frankly thought that I had cleared them up. I also thought that marriage would solve my problems because now I can have a sexual relationship with the woman that I love. No longer will I be seeking it out from any place that's inappropriate. That's a common feeling, and most people who I work with in recovery today share that similar thought. That was not the case. My experiences took me away from home. I was out and about a lot. I was a sales guy. I always have been a sales guy. And because of the hiding and the deceit that was part of what I had brought into the marriage, I continued actually after a period of time going back to that behavior. And unfortunately, as it does in many people's lives, my behavior escalated to the point where I was now looking for interaction with others. And that went to adult establishments and then finally on to seeking out prostitutes. And so I became a victim of a double life that I had chosen for myself. I did not want to expose any of the experiences that I was having in sexual acting out because it was totally the different person that was in my home or in my church setting or in the community or in my business setting. No one knew of these behaviors. However, as they escalated, the weight of the escalation got to be something more than I could bear. And so this slide is going to illustrate to you how I felt. I grew up on a farm, and that tractor is inoperable. Even though it has tremendous capability, it is out of commission. And so any of you who have been stuck in anything, a vehicle or a tractor, can relate to the idea that I'm not going to get out of this mess by myself. So I chose at age 37 to come forward, and I wanted to be done with this. But I had no clue what I was dealing with. At age 37, I was told to put this behind me. I brought Rhyll into the equation and confessed completely all my behaviors and truly wanted to change my life. My heart was broken. For 3 years, I stayed away from behavior, but I did not get any help from any direction. There was no direction given to me from anyone that I was dealing with something that was serious, and I had to be working at it constantly. In fact, it would require some lifestyle changes. I made no lifestyle changes. I continued to travel. After 3 years, I fell back into behavior. Now, I fell back into this behavior, feeling so ashamed about it, I thought I'll stop on my own, but I'm not going to say anything about it, which was a huge mistake. I then continued on living a double life for 7 more years. So the first time I came forward, I basically did not understand my issues, nor did anyone that was seeking to help us understand our issues, my issues. Twice coming forward, I came forward 10 years later, same behaviors had reoccurred, and the story gets rather complicated at that point. But at this point, Rhyll wanted to step in and help me. I wanted her to stay with me. Our marriage was in jeopardy, but she is a woman with grit and power and determination, and we have things that we wanted to work for. It was important that we stay together. She took the lead of my recovery. She took the lead. She found the therapists. She found the books. She was the one that was asking me, what are you doing as far as your work is concerned? I did actually go to a couple of 12-step meetings. She actually went with me, which was not appropriate. But what did happen is I went to a couple of meetings and felt like I didn't belong, so I didn't go anymore. Well, as the story continued, I felt like I could do this. I had help from my wife. I had help from others. But I didn't understand, again, what I was dealing with because I failed to get myself deeply immersed into understanding what I was dealing with. I fell back into behavior 3 years later. And the story repeated itself again. This is a tough story. People ask themselves, this guy is not a very smart guy. Surely he would be getting the message by now. There were plenty of consequences, and there was plenty to live for in my life. On August 25 of 2005, I was arrested for picking up a prostitute. That was a life-changing experience. It brought to my attention how out of control my life truly was. So, did I look like this? I looked like this. And so that part of my story is one that I needed an interruption. God gave me an interruption. He allowed me to be arrested. He then allowed me to contemplate my circumstances to the degree that I was willing to think about who I am deeply enough to do something about it. Go ahead.
At that point, I figured our marriage was over. Things changed. For those of you who have seen our story, there was a moment that I surrendered to God. I no longer figured I could do anything about his addiction. And I literally turned my hands up to heaven and looked up and said, take him. I've done everything I know how to do. I figured it was all over. But one day, 1 minute at a time, I kept asking, what am I supposed to do? And my answer was, and I wasn't asking all those other people out there. My answer was, hang in there just for today. And find my love, God's love, in your life just today. I lived one day at a time, finding that kind of support from above. But we also, Stephen found good therapy on his own. So we went to good therapy. He started learning. He started going to 12-step every single week. He never missed. It was 4th of July. He never missed. Our kids would all be there. Dad knew. They all knew where Dad was. They all knew that he was, because he had gotten really honest with our children, our adult children as well, and said, this is what I've been dealing with. He told them the story. Hiding, and shame perpetuates this addiction. Those people in your life and in our life, I'm just going to speak from our perspective, who need to know, need to know. And so that humble, the very first time he sat down with each one of our 7 children individually and told them, it was excruciatingly painful. And in a very good way, a little bit therapeutic.
So this is, the point Rhyll's just making is a beginning now of where true recovery began for me, and began for our relationship, and began for Rhyll. I need to show you quickly, you saw what I looked like, stuck. Now you saw what Rhyll looked like the second time that I came forward.
I'm just going to stick in there until we both
She was going to save me no matter what. But the critical thing was, this is what I looked like when I was in my addiction. And curiously, all of these behaviors are most evident to a spouse, with the possible exception of acting out. A spouse will notice that there is manipulation, that I'm disconnected, I'm not there, I'm blaming, I objectify, I feel resentment quickly. And so a spouse sees that in a person that's involved in behavior that is hiding and deceitful, but they can't put their hand on it. They can't
usually
figure it out.
can't figure it out. I have never seen my husband act out, ever. Not 1 minute of proof. But now that I know, our therapist said, because the first time we went into therapy, I said, how would I ever know if he's telling me the truth? I can ask him every single day, are you doing okay? And he lies through his teeth. I don't feel safe with that. And he said, you will know. Why? Because I became educated and I started understanding that that's what addict looks like.
You can see that the addict is focused on self. All of those behaviors are very selfish and very internal, okay?
And then I did not even hear until about 5 years ago when a therapist said to me in the parking lot, Rhyll, are you aware that you've been traumatized more than most women? I had not really ever heard the trauma word. And when she said that, I went, maybe that's true. And that trauma looked like this: confused, hypervigilant. The number 2 time he came out, I was going to fix it. As a strong woman who has faith, I figured I could put him in my handcart and pull him across the prairie. I just kept saying to him, get your legs in. This is making me mad. You're not helping. And so some women will police, if they know that he's doing porn, they will check multiple times a day on the computer. That is called what I call crazy committee. I have a crazy committee in my head and it says, keep checking, keep checking. It takes away her peace and serenity. Denial, perfectionist, the woman who vacuums the carpet 3 times a day. Really? I mean, manipulative, helpless, nervous, victim, poor me, there's nothing I can do. These are, and then the addicted spouse became in the center. We start focusing so much on that person and their behavior that we forget who we are.
So we had to give a little bit of preface here. How are people that look like this going to find recovery for their marriage? So back to the point of the story where I began to think about something other than myself. This is a powerful quote many of us have heard, and that is essentially we have to turn ourselves away from introspective only, the fear and the lies and the deceit that are associated with the behavior, and look to a power greater than ourselves, God, to help us. And that requires submission. and a willingness to be honest and open. So what happened in our story is the weight of my hypocrisy, lies, and deceit became so heavy that I determined I would come forward again in spite of the potential consequences. I believed that our marriage was over, but I did determine that I had no choice but to come forward again, and I was willing to talk about it and be honest. At that point, I took charge of my own recovery. So this was in 2005. And my recovery became paramount. You see what I looked like before. I wasn't a very eligible person to have a good relationship with my spouse, was I? No. So what did I determine that I would do to make some changes? And honestly, each one of these points became critical in my own efforts of recovery. And this is the pathway of recovery that Rhyll and I now talk about in relationship to both our circumstances, mine and hers. Mine is a person involved in behavior and behavioral, the addictive behaviors being betrayal, and Rhyll is an afflicted spouse. I became involved with qualified therapists. I had some spiritual guidance. I was very interested in education. I became serious about 12-step. I focused on my relationship with God instead of my relationship with self. It changed my whole perspective. And I became, instead of all of these selfish manifestations that were part of my actions and behaviors, I turned myself to God and I became honest. I became honest with Rhyll. I became honest with my children. I became honest with my spiritual leaders. I became honest with my therapists. There was no minimization of anything going on in my life, and there was no hiding of behavior that had occurred. And so once I chose to become honest, humble, accountable, and I was then able to become connected. I was setting the stage at that point with determination to try and save our relationship. And I'm very serious about that, trying to save our relationship. Rhyll essentially had determined that she had had enough, justifiably so. Many ask her, why in the world would you stay as long as you did? And that question is not easily understood without understanding the dynamic of who we all are and what we really want. So is it possible for a person to turn themselves from self to God? It is possible, and we're reminded of that all of the time. So, how then can I put myself into a position to be eligible for a relationship? By practicing the actions of recovery, I become a different person. Instead of being angry and mean, I can be kind because I'm not so angry with myself. I can then be patient instead of quick to anger because I am not so angry with myself. I can then have a feeling that I will go outside of myself and be part of my wife's life and my children's lives, not just tied up inside myself. So each item on this list is absolutely part of what recovery looks like. I am now working to make myself eligible for a marriage relationship, because I have chosen to be honest, I have chosen to be connected, I have chosen to be humble. So those types of actions now make me eligible for someone who might look to say, I'm willing to consider staying with you, but if I see behaviors that are indicating that you're not in recovery, I cannot feel safe. Why then would I choose to stay?
And that's my safety. Like Dan talked about attachment. A woman, any person, every person needs to feel like they're safe and attached. And in a marriage relationship, we need to feel that safety. A betrayed wife has no safety. She has, I talked about it like we had a cat who adopted us, and he had apparently been kicked by a man because he was okay with women. But if a man got close to him, he ran. And I said, I feel like our cat, Matt. Not a great name. I feel like our cat because I'm so afraid I'm going to get kicked again. And it is so painful. I have been on my face. I've sobbed my heart out. I don't want to do this anymore. You know the woman that Mark Shurtleff was talking about? My heart goes to her. I know that pain. I know that hopeless feeling, like I keep trying and this is what I get. So what I had to know, our therapist knew that I was going to know for two reasons. I was going to become educated through therapy, good education, and I was going to know because of the spiritual piece, because I was going to trust my gut. I was going to trust the instinct that I had every day when I pray. Am I okay? Please connect me, God, to myself and to you. And then I will know if I'm safe, if I'm okay. I learned, I guess, can I go to these or am I next?
Well, what Dan specifically asked us to speak about was the concept of how do I battle for the heart of my spouse? How do I battle for the heart of my spouse?
Isn't that an amazing thought? I always wanted that. I wanted my husband to cherish me. And he would say he loved me. And I'd say to the therapist, I don't feel like my husband loves me. And he goes, he can't. He is not capable of loving you. He has an addiction that has taken the center of his life. Even though on the outside, if you ask our neighbors, his business associates, church leaders, church people, everyone around us, they would say, wow, he is a great guy. And yet, I knew something was wrong, but I thought maybe I was crazy, that I had expectations that were way too beyond what they should be. But when he started to find recovery, this is not a once-a-year kind of thing. This is an every single day, every single night. We get into bed, we pray, we read some scripture, and we check in. I'm going to give you this little check-in. A, E, I, O, U, and Y. And we have an S in there, too. Accountability. Accountability.
Abstinent.
Abstinent. A's. Abstinent is the first one. Well, what abstinent from what? He doesn't act out anymore. But how would I know that? Abstinent from lust. Exercise. I mean, and in my book, I've got them all written down. But we check in every day, and one of them is unexpressed emotions. Unexpressed emotions. Why do I go to fear? Or why do I go to angry or manipulative or controlling? Based on fear. And I started to figure that out. And why does he do some of those things? Based on fear or whatever. And so every day. Is that a bad thing? People will say, how long are we going to have to do this? Can't I get this in 6 weeks? I'll do 2 steps a week, okay? And I'll be done. I'll graduate. And you go, 6 weeks? No way. I have to tell you the funny thing. A woman calls me and says, can you fix him in 6 weeks? Because we're going on a cruise in 3 months, and I don't want to go if he's bad. I said to her, you know what? You might want to cancel that cruise or go by yourself. But no guarantee in 6 weeks. In fact, you haven't even started the honeymoon phase of this. 3 to 5 years. When our therapist said, I said, of course me, how long is this going to take? 3 to 5 years of good recovery. Are you serious? Wow, we're almost at 8 years, and it went by. We lived our lives. That was quite amazing. And things happened. The world went on. It wasn't so painful every single day. There was a lot of joy. In fact, there's been a ton of joy. But the adversary and other people will tell you, this is just gonna take you down. Well, based on what? I don't want to be stuck in the mud with that horse, just being devastated. I want to find joy in my life through this process, which I have.
And so, let me give you my thoughts on what I feel is very important to win the heart of my wife back. First, I must be willing to be completely honest about what is going on in my life. I can't choose to hide anything. I can't choose to be less than transparent. That's the only way that I have an opportunity to begin to rebuild trust in the relationship. Rhyll will say, trust is this action that you had today, coming home on time, put a drop of trust into my bucket. And so I have to be willing to be completely honest about what's going on in my life throughout the day, each day, and be accessible and accountable for that. That's what we'll call that honesty and transparency and accountability. Another point is that I have to be willing to recognize her pain. And for a person that's dealing with the behaviors of sexual addiction, it is such a selfish feeling. And there's a term that we use, it's called victim. And every single person that I know that struggled with this addiction in some way deals with these feelings that I'm a victim, because there is so much self-loathing that goes on. And so instead of looking to myself and saying I'm a victim, I must say to myself that I need to be available for my wife and support her in her recovery of trauma. How can I do that? I can acknowledge her feelings instead of saying, you know what, it's about 8 years ago that I came forward and I've been working really hard ever since. When are you going to get over it? Now,
Not a good idea to say that to me.
that's not a good thing. Are you ever going to stop looking back? Are you ever going to stop bringing up this situation? I have to be willing to recognize that her pain and her trauma and her feelings are real, and not minimize or excuse myself or try to protect myself by being defensive and saying things such as, look at all the great things that I am doing. Why do you feel the way you do? And so, in a way, I have to be willing to accept that I have put her in a situation where she has suffered Gethsemane, pain, trauma, as a result of my actions, and not blame her in any way for my actions.
And that feeling when we have a little script in my book that says, and it starts out when I'm in pain, when something's happened. And it might be a trigger that is totally unrelated to sexual addiction. But all of a sudden, and it hasn't happened very often in the last few years, but I get this feeling of, he doesn't care. He doesn't have my back. I am so afraid. I need to run. And when he says, I am so sorry, no wife should have ever had to deal with this kind of pain. And then, what can I do for you right now? And when I get honest and say, that's what I am feeling, I have to be honest not only with myself, but with him and say, this is painful. But if I lash out and I'm not true to myself and I go to my victim place, I don't feel right about myself. But pain, sorrow, even at the beginning, anger was okay. It was justifiable. But I couldn't do things that would damage somebody else and feel right with myself. So lashing out and being mean and bitter, and I didn't want to be that kind of woman. But I needed to be honest with myself and with him that this is painful. And not stuff it. We stuff it too much. And then we wonder why we have pains here, and we can't figure out what's wrong with us. No, be honest. And you can be honest in this recovery process.
This picture by Linda Curley Christensen, Gently Up the Stream, really tells the story of how we were able to find recovery in our marriage. And it's interesting to look at what's going on in this picture. There are two canoes, an individual in both. And that's the way we envision ourselves. That we are individuals working on our recovery, but we are looking towards the same goal, the light in the top of the picture. The goal is upstream. Downstream, if we go with the flow of the river, is the danger that will kill us. And so we talked about this. How do I, as a warrior seeking to protect my wife and win her heart, what is going to be required of me? The second time that I came forward, I really left it up to Rhyll. Is that a warrior heart, leaving your wife in the front lines of the battle? That doesn't sound very good, does it? Doesn't sound good at all. So I had to be willing to step into the front line of the battle and be willing to take the actions of recovery, which included, we talked about these, education, help with spiritual guidance, qualified therapy, and consistently working 12-step. Now, those actions of recovery helped to build trust. At that point, we have something to begin to build on within the relationship. And so all of these things that now begin to add value to the concept of the relationship healing. There has been honesty. There continues to be honesty. There is an acknowledgement that what I was doing was wrong and that it needed to change, and that I'm willing to work my individual recovery. Then, once I'm working my individual recovery, I can reach towards her and support her in her recovery. Now, this is a curious thought. Most of the people that we work with in recovery don't recognize the need for the spouse's healing. There is this common feeling between the two of them that if me, the person dealing with the addiction, finds recovery, then my wife, some miraculous way, is going to heal. That is not correct thinking. I am looking for my own recovery and my own healing. I must help her recognize that she needs her own recovery and healing, and only when she determines that she is willing to work on that recovery and healing will she then begin to understand her, from her perspective, how she can be eligible for the relationship as well.
Finding that safety is the part that I really want to just briefly, we could talk for a couple of hours. Safety was critical for me, and I knew I wasn't. Because he could go for 3 years without acting out, right? So what did that mean? I was just waiting for the next big crisis. And I didn't want to, I'm getting too old for that. Maybe not. But the point that I learned was, as I said, become educated, go to God, trust my gut, which is really him telling me. And what I learned in my education was to set appropriate boundaries. Just like we said, a 6-week program is not going to take care of this. Because a true brain addiction, we need to understand what we're dealing with this and what it means. And so I needed to set appropriate boundaries. And if I needed to detach with love, that was okay. About 15 years ago, somebody showed me a chapter on detaching with love, and I went, no way, heresy, that's not truth. That can't be, because I've got to attach with my husband. Well, I didn't realize he's not available in his addiction. And so setting boundaries gave me a feeling of safety. So, and I wrote about this, the one experience that when I realized that he was disconnected, it looked like addict all over again. In his face, it looked like addict. And I started figuring that out. Oh, wow, something's not, doesn't feel right. And I spoke it. Something doesn't feel right. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. 5 minutes later, we're sitting on the couch together. It's not like anything. No, I'm fine. And my little crazy committee went, you're crazy. Something's wrong with you. And I put it aside and I said, no, this is how I feel. Okay, I don't feel fine, I don't feel safe. I'm going to speak it again. And he said, oh, you know what? On Monday there was something and I had a lust trigger. Well, we had a boundary that we set together. My boundary and his boundary was, for his safety and mine, that we would be honest and transparent. And so we talked about it. And without a plan of action, it's not called a boundary. It's called clarifying my wishes. And that's when I start getting crazy. I told him I didn't want him to do this anymore, and he keeps doing it. And I don't. No, the boundary is, if there's a lust trigger and you don't tell me within 24 hours, we sleep separate. That was so hard. And you know what? He said, wow, I guess I didn't tell you. It's been 2 days. I'm sorry. And my crazy committee said, oh, he's gotten humble, and look, he's doing good. But you know what? He said, I guess I'll be sleeping in the other room. We prayed, gave each other a hug. And for a moment, I thought, wow, this is hard. And then I went, thank you. This is what I need, and this is what he needs. This is right. This is good. This is not. We don't have one foot out in the divorce door. So boundaries, taking care of myself, learning to trust my instincts, and going to God.
Rhyll, could I ask
Yes.
here too, that setting boundaries for you on this, it was more about what you were not willing to deal with and tolerate rather than setting the boundary to teach him a lesson or to somehow change his behavior. That's a real important part.
Exactly. That's trying to control somebody. If I tried to set boundaries and say, then that's not about me finding safety and peace. That's manipulating and controlling, which I have discovered is not the way I want to live my life. I also want to say, this is about healing a marriage. There are many, many marriages out there that have failed because of this. And I know many friends. That woman who has been through this kind of relationship, though she may be divorced, must have healing. She must have healing. I believe that I would be at least on my second marriage to a sex addict without healing. I know women who have been on their third, and one lady, 70 years old, 5 times, all sex addicts. We must heal and become connected with God and educated on this issue. When the women wherever you are as a woman, mother, grandmother, wife, teacher, whatever you are, when we understand this issue, we become educated on this issue, we understand it from the beginning to the end, it will change. I know it. I have seen it. I have seen in my own life and with other women, redeemed women of God have tender, merciful hearts, backbones of steel, and hands that are prepared for the fight. I know it. I believe it. And when we get it, this will change. Because we won't stand for it anymore and say, I guess I have to look the other way out of fear. We will say, this is truth, and that is not right. And this is what I must do to stand for what is right and be true to myself.
We're just about out of time, is that right?
Yeah.
Can I speak for 1 minute on a question that's often asked, and that's what about intimacy? Is it possible to restore intimacy in the relationship? And our answer to that is, it is possible to restore intimacy in the relationship, but don't expect that to be restored with the initial coming forward. The intimacy is built upon trust. And so all of the things that we really talked about today are efforts to rebuild trust in the relationship. And so intimacy, which is honest and has an emotional connection, not just physical, is what we're seeking. In fact, we're really seeking for that spiritual connection as well. But it's not going to come just on that initial effort of confession. And we could go into some stories about what I and others have experienced in this effort for me as a person wanting to find, am I okay, looking to sex to do that with my wife. That's a very unhealthy way to do it. But intimacy can be restored as trust is restored, and so that the relationship is built on an emotional connection and a spiritual connection, just not the physical. So how can that be done? It takes time, and it takes work, and many times it takes abstinence to begin with. Abstinence for a considerable period of time may be appropriate. In our case, it was abstinence for a considerable period of time. We invite you to understand more about what the concepts are of recovery. Rhyll has written a very effective book based upon the things that we've talked about today. I've made a little bit of a contribution to it. But through our story, which really is about finding the relationship by building trust, and me being willing to take the lead for my own recovery, and Rhyll being able to accept the need that she needs healing, we were able to discover that our relationship could not just survive, but it can thrive. And we then can be prepared to help others in our struggles as we go forward in our life. And we appreciate the chance to share our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen Rhyll. I would like to personally thank Steve and Rhyll for their courage, their willingness to be here. I know they're probably careful about just trying to peddle their book. Let me tell you, it is worth you acquiring it if this would be helpful to you. What can I do about him crossed out me? And you can get this at their table out here at Lifeline, or SA Lifeline, and you can also order it online as well. I want to thank all of you for being here and your courage. God bless you in your journey. Thank you.